All right, we are going to get things started here. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of Rotary Club of Seattle number 4, named for being the 4th oldest club in the world and the largest in our region. I'm your club president, Beth Knox. As we convene today, I would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. Now, just a reminder that the first 3 meetings of each month are held in person at either the Westin Hotel or the Rainier Club, with an option to join virtually via Zoom. The 4th meeting of the month, like today, is held exclusively online. And now I would like to welcome club member Tom Massaros to share our inspiration for the day.
Hey, greetings from the roadside in New Jersey. I had the unique experience of cleaning out some old files of mine recently. My former company is giving up its office space now, and as everyone there has learned to work at home. It seems that the pandemic has brought change to us in an accelerated fashion. And change is something society talks about and even envisions. But when it smacks us right in the face, we rarely react favorably. The best example I have of that is when the tech people would show up in the office and say, today was the day they're upgrading the software. I hated that change. It just meant I had to learn new ways, new steps, new procedures. And alas, I was able to adjust and learn and to improve. Pardon me just for a second while I adjust here. There we go. So in my files from the decommissioned office was an article from the Seattle Times dated Sunday, April 23rd, 1978. Some of you may not have been born yet. I was not even a Rotarian yet. I joined Seattle 4 in 1979. The headline for the article was, Rotary, 4-point test has no point without women. The Rotary Club at Duarte, California had just been expelled from Rotary for admitting women. The article was an opinion piece written by Dr. Walt Menninger, a psychiatrist from Topeka, Kansas. Let me read just one paragraph from that article. What really is important to Rotary? Maintaining an exclusive organization for men, or being committed to fulfilling the significant objectives outlined in the Rotary Constitution, which are encouraging ideals of service, recognizing the worthiness of all useful occupations, advancing international understanding, goodwill, and peace throughout the world. The good news is that after a court battle, Rotary changed. And I hope you recognize the increased value that change has brought to our Rotary Club. Ann Farrell became one of the first women members, and later our first woman president in 1996. Since that time, we've had 9 more women presidents, including our current president, Beth Knox. And we are a better club for the change, as we currently have many more women members, many more women committee chairs, and many more women board members involved in our club. So the next time you face some changes in your life, certainly ponder them, but don't push back arbitrarily. Change is a constant, and we need to thoroughly embrace it. President Beth, I'm glad you're here today, the product of change that began in 1978. Back to you.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate that. And not only your comments, but also for getting us centered for our online meeting today. I'd like to also say thank you to Pete Delaunay, our club member, who is capturing the summary of our meeting so we can share it back out with all of you in Friday's digital newsletter. Now, to introduce our guests who have joined us online today is Seattle 4's Membership and Communications Manager, Miri Goldie. Miri.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's call. We have one guest, Andrea Black, who is a guest of Fedva Dickman. If you're also a guest today, please let yourself be known in the chat, and we will welcome you that way after this announcement. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Miri. Now, our short program speaker today is one of our own club members, Heather Fitzpatrick, classification Human and Community Services. Heather joined Rotary in 2001 and has served as Sergeant of Arms, a VP of Membership, and on the Centennial Committee that chose Wellspring Family Services as the recipient of Rotary's Centennial Anniversary Grant. Now, little did Heather know that nearly 10 years later, she would become that organization's CEO and president. She is here today to share an update on what's going on at Wellspring. Heather.
Thank you, President Beth. Is my presentation showing?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. I can't see it on my screen, so thank you. Thank you for the greeting, and good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I'm delighted to be here today to share a brief overview of what's happening in the house that Rotary built. For those of you who are not familiar with Wellspring, we are a 132-year-old nonprofit organization whose mission is to end the cycle of family homelessness in our community. Family homelessness is the largest segment of the homeless population. It's also the easiest to address. That's because the drivers of family homelessness are predominantly financial and not behavioral health related. Our clients are disproportionately young, BIPOC, single female head of household with young children. Most are working, and they are no more likely to experience mental health or substance misuse disorders than their more stably housed peers. Since our time today is brief, I'm going to highlight 3 exciting developments at Wellspring and how you can help make them a success. So first, the pandemic was particularly hard on families. Temporary school closures and permanent shuttering of many childcare programs, along with unexpected medical bills and closures of businesses that employed a lot of low-income women, created an unprecedented strain on families. Fortunately, Wellspring was one of the first human service agencies in our region to develop systems to distribute private and public COVID relief funds to households. As a result, Wellspring services have expanded dramatically over the past few years. In addition to housing services, our family store more than quadrupled the number of families that it serves. And we did all of this using personal shoppers rather than in-person shopping because of the pandemic. While eviction prevention funding is ending, the demand in our family store remains strong. In fact, it's growing, and we need your help. You can help end family homelessness by volunteering with Rotary once a month, or by committing a few hours every week as a routine volunteer to help fill orders in our family store. So second big thing going on in our neck of the woods, in the house that Rotary built. Over the past few years, Wellspring expanded our contracts beyond the ones related to COVID, where we deliver human services on behalf of governmental entities. However, we are now walking away from most of those contracts. Why? It's because they don't make business sense. Government contracts pay in the human service sector, on average, 72 cents on the dollar for what we cover. And they ask nonprofits to come up with the remaining balance through fundraising or braided funding from other sources. For example, one contract that Wellspring has had for the last several years cost us $400,000 in donor contributions for every $1 million that we delivered in services. This is common in our sector, and it's not sustainable. When government funding deliberately precludes coverage of the full cost of services, it causes nonprofits to skimp on the basics of internal controls, oversight, compensation, and benefits. As a result, we experience high levels of turnover, we struggle to acquire competent staff, and we produce subpar outcomes. In addition, our donors are subsidizing the government, which I'm pretty confident was not what they had in mind when they wrote a check for us. Wellspring is really fortunate. We have other revenue streams besides donors to help subsidize government contracts. However, this situation is driving critical human service organizations out of business, and they are forcing many of our employees to live on incomes that are less than those that our clients experiencing homelessness are being paid. We are determined to move government entities toward covering the full cost of delivering services, and we are collaborating with more than 40 other nonprofit leaders in the Brave Commitments Collaborative to make it happen. You can help create a healthy and sustainable sector by supporting our advocacy efforts. And finally, as I mentioned, Wellspring is fortunate to have another revenue stream that helps defray the losses we experience on government contracts. Wellspring generates income in most years from our employee assistance program, which we sell to businesses, governmental entities, and nonprofits across the Pacific Northwest, actually, and nationally. And an employee assistance program, or an EAP, is a benefit that employers offer to staff that helps them address crises in their personal or professional lives that impact their performance in the workplace. In general, employers generate a return of about 700% on an investment in this benefit. Wellspring EAP is very proud of our higher than average participation rates and correspondingly higher return on employer investments. I'm sometimes asked how this relates to family homelessness. As I mentioned before, family homelessness is typically driven by a financial crisis. It also typically strikes families while they're still employed, but it can lead to job loss because of anxiety, trauma, and the challenge of trying to find affordable new housing. For employers, this instability can result in deteriorating performance in the workplace and the cost of replacing personnel who must move to find affordable housing. Our current EAP program helps employees with the anxiety, but does not address the underlying problem. To address that, employers have traditionally had three alternatives. First, they can do nothing. And then if the employee's crisis results in turnover, it will cost on average, about 6 to 7 months of their compensation in order to replace that position and get the new staff member up to speed. So not a cheap solution. Second, they could pay all low-income employees more money, but that's not really a very viable economic solution for most organizations. Third, we could all pay more in taxes and deal with homelessness after people fall into homelessness, which is incredibly expensive, about 3 times as expensive as preventing eviction to begin with. So far, those have been the only options. I'm delighted to announce that Wellspring is now offering a fourth option, and it is the least expensive of all, the Employee Stability Program. This new benefit program is designed to keep employees housed, reduce turnover, and retain talent. Employees at risk of losing housing or experiencing homelessness can access services, emergency housing, and if needed, short-term financial support. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this sector, the reason this is important is because anybody who's employed usually has too much income to qualify for current government services. So they're ineligible until they lose everything and have lost their job. So this benefit will keep people from falling into that situation. The Employee Stability Program will significantly reduce the number of families experiencing homelessness in our community and save employers money on turnover costs. You can help by recommending this new program to your employers and to peers in other organizations. So a quick recap: we need volunteers, we need advocacy help, and we need referrals for EAP and employee stability programs. I appreciate your interest in what has happened in the house that Rotary built, and I would love to talk with you if you would like to have more information. My email address is at the bottom of the screen. I can also be found in the Rotary directory because I am a Rotarian as well. And I really thank you for your interest and support and your concern for families in our community.
Wow, thank you, Heather. I am just struck by not only how grateful I am for your leadership of such a critical community resource, but I love this circle of Rotary here. It's its own phenomenon, right? To hear how not only the impact that Rotary had so many years ago, but your connection to Rotary and now in leading Wellspring. So it's really wonderful that we have an opportunity to make a positive impact for our neighbors and fellow residents in the region. So thank you again, Heather. All right, now we're going to move to our main program, and to introduce our speaker today, please welcome our Prince of Programs, Ken Grant.
Prince of Programs. It never gets old. All right, I have the very big privilege of introducing our two guest speakers today. Forgive me while I read. You know it's not what I do, but it's good information, so I thought I would do it the honor of reading. We've got two guests with us today. Miri Cypers serves as the Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League's Pacific Northwest Office, a national anti-hate organization that works to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hate through education, community building, and civic rights advocacy. She has a long-standing commitment to social justice and has worked for over a decade in government and in advocacy. And with her, second up today would be Morgan Moon, serves as an investigative researcher for the ADL Center on Extremism and the Center for Anti-Defamation League that tracks extremist trends, ideologies, and groups across the political spectrum. Morgan works to investigate, expose, and disrupt extremist threats across our communities and specializes her research on far-right extremism and online radicalism. That's a lot of big words for me, but I'm so excited to hear today's conversation because we see it going on firsthand, and I can't wait, I think, along with the rest of us, to see how we can combat it, understand it, and do better as a society. Miri, it's off to you. Thank you.
Of course. Can everybody see my screen? Is it big and beautiful, or should I do a different layout? Is this okay?
Do a different layout.
Okay, I'll do presentation version.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Before I start, I just want to thank you so much from the Seattle Rotary for having myself and my colleague Morgan here today, and also give a big shout out to our wonderful board member, John Bridge, who I know is a longtime Rotarian and an amazing advocate for our organization here in Seattle. So does that look good, Ken? Should I start? Okay. As Ken mentioned, my name is Miri Cypers, and I have the honor of serving as the regional director for the ADL in the Pacific Northwest. We are based in Seattle with a small team of local and regional and national experts who work to fight hate. As you might know a little bit about our organization, we were founded over 100 years ago in the early 1900s when there was virulent anti-Semitism, and our founders really wanted to see a vision of the United States in which no one would experience discrimination and people of all backgrounds and communities could thrive. So we at the ADL have this really powerful dual mission of stopping the defamation of the Jewish people, fighting all forms of hate, and securing fair and just treatment for all. And that kind of duality, the balance of being an organization that's rooted in the Jewish community, but is really fighting all forms of bigotry and working to protect the civil rights of all people, still is our guiding mission today. We have the honor of being based in Seattle, and we also have, in addition to our national office, a network of regional offices across the country, which are really the delivery system for our on-the-ground programs and mission that we work on at ADL. So I'll get into a little bit of context about the moment that we are in right now. I'll tell you a little bit about what we do at the ADL to address hate and secure the civil rights of all people. And then I'll turn it over to Morgan Moon, my colleague at our Center on Extremism, who's going to do a deeper dive into extremism today and what we're particularly, seeing in the Seattle area. So as you see from these images, we are in a really challenging moment in society. We're dealing with a steep rise in hate crimes targeting many vulnerable, marginalized communities. During the pandemic, we saw a steep rise in anti-Asian hate crimes and xenophobia. We at the ADL, as experts on anti-Semitism, have just been tracking huge growth in discrimination targeting the Jewish community in recent years. And of course, layered upon all of these really critical trends, we see ourselves continuing to be in the midst of racial protests against racial injustice and a really transformative conversation in society today about what equity looks like for all of our communities. And as you can see in the image on the top left, on top of all of these issues as if they weren't complex and challenging enough, we're also seeing the steep rise of domestic extremism, which culminated in an effort to overthrow the US government on January 6th. So we find ourselves in a really unique time, but I think we at ADL have been doing this work for over a century and have many tried and true ways of pushing hate back to the fringes and the margins where it belongs, but also really pursuing innovation to try to tackle the issues of today and tomorrow. So I think some of the things that I'd like to share with you today and really impart on this group is that, as you can imagine by probably what you see in the news and the climate around you, hate crimes have indeed been rising over recent years. And according to FBI and organizations like ADL that track these kinds of data points over time, we are seeing steep rise in hate crimes since 2016, really every year. And the FBI tracks this data and they put it together in national reports. And the data is collected from law enforcement agencies across our communities that intake reports from victims and hopefully report. There's a huge conversation there that we could also have about, the role of law enforcement and data collection and how the system really works effectively. But I just wanted to show you this breakdown because what we continue to see year over year is not only the rise in hate, but also how race-based hate crimes continue to compose the majority of hate crimes that occur in our country. We see religious-based hate crimes also being a huge data point in this graph that you see, as well as sexual orientation and gender identity, disability, and gender. There are a lot of different categories of people who are impacted on a day-to-day basis. While there's this national trend going on in this national picture, I think there's also maybe the tendency of some people in Washington State or the Seattle area to feel like we might be immune to these kinds of problems in our community. But what I think the FBI hate crimes data, and the hate crimes data is pretty underreported generally, shows is that we're really not immune to these trends in Washington State. And we are typically the 5th or 3rd highest per capita rate of hate crimes in the country, and the 5th or 3rd highest number of hate crimes. So I think it is really important to see that there are some bright spots here, that hate is being pushed back on, it's being reported, and data bears that out. But I think it also reflects a really dark underbelly that a lot of us are facing in our various communities. So I just kind of mentioned a few of those stats in Washington State, which I think are really startling and deserve a lot of attention. We at ADL also complement this FBI data by collecting incidents from everyday people who are constituents in our community and members of our community who report directly to us. Maybe they don't feel safety in reporting to law enforcement, or they go to a trusted community organization, but our team is very small and overextended with the number of people who are reporting hate-based incidents both online and on the ground. And we serve people in a variety of ways, but all of this data is used to really show and bring transparency to the issue. And it's something that we have done since 1979, is release an audit. And with data and numbers, we can show trends, and we can really shine a bright light onto the issue of hate and spotlight it. So what we're trying to do is really push it back to the fringes. What we at ADL have done for many years, and what we have found to be an effective strategy at pushing back against hate, is having an integrated and holistic approach. As our CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, says, there's no silver bullet to this problem. Hatred and nativism and a lot of the challenges that we're seeing today have existed for so long. But through an all society approach where many different stakeholders are engaged and invested and speaking out and acting and pushing back, that's when we're really able to make change. We have a lot of core beliefs at ADL around the importance of diversity, that bias is universal, and just as prejudice is learned, it can also be overcome and unlearned. I would say if there's any slide that really speaks to different groups that I present to, it's our pyramid of hate. It's not a great sounding name, but it is an important one because the pyramid shows how bias can really be aggravated and build over time. And like a pyramid, sometimes the most innocuous actions or speech or activities that one might disregard perhaps as everyday or, you know, made in a joking manner can really multiply over time and become much more serious. And like the layers of a pyramid is what we teach young people and law enforcement and different groups that we educate. When you remove the bottom layers of a pyramid, the pyramid really is no longer able to exist. So one of the most important pieces of the work that we do at ADL is educate. And we are one of the largest providers of anti-bias education nationwide, reaching millions of students. And we have seen just a clamoring from K through 12 schools who have been grappling with hate-based incidents in their schools. So we've had so many schools reach out to us in recent years to ask, how do we create a more inclusive atmosphere for our students? Do you have programs? How do we talk about specific issues that are happening in the classroom? And how do we communicate, you know, at the district level? How do we deal with specific incidents when they arise? When, you know, a swastika is carved in a desk at a school, or, you know, a racial epithet is used. So we're really proud of the growth of our programs. When I first came in, we were reaching about 4,000 students each year, and now it's over 40,000 students and educators in the Seattle area. So there is so much more work to be done in terms of growth and scale and digitization, but we're definitely trying to meet the moment as much as possible, recognizing that just as hate and bias can be learned, these are really core beliefs that can also be challenged and unlearned throughout someone's lifetime. We're doing a lot of really important community engagement work as well. I mean, you are Rotarians, you know so well the importance of being involved in your community, building relationships, you know, being able to learn about different perspectives and how that informs, you know, your work and your life experience. So we've been really proud of the relationships that we've been able to build with diverse stakeholders in communities. We launched the Asian Jewish Initiative in Seattle last year, for example, which is really an opportunity for communities to come together to talk about shared history and shared struggles today, and how we can be better partners to one another and collaborate more. We're also really invested in legislative advocacy. I mean, I think one of the powerful tools that we have is we're not only serving people who are impacted by hate on the front lines in a community, but we're able to transfer that kind of knowledge of everyday situations into systemic change. And we have a super ambitious legislative agenda coming up in 2023 in Washington State, where we are going to be pushing for a statewide hate crimes hotline like we've seen passed in Oregon, legislative efforts to protect victims of doxing whose personal information is released without their consent with the intent to harm them. And finally, a really interesting bill that's currently moving in California to remove tax-exempt status from extremist groups. You know, I have so much more to share with you, but I recognize that my 10 minutes is up, and I think it's a really good segue to my wonderful colleague, Morgan, who is going to talk from the vantage point of being an investigative researcher at our Center on Extremism. I mean, some of the most talented people who are doing this work day in and day out on the dark web, tracking some of the most hateful, you know, content and actions, but really doing so to be able to shine a light and spotlight hate and to keep our community safer. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Morgan for a little bit about her work at our Center on Extremism.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm just going to launch into it since it is a short amount of time. But I think it really goes without saying, and I think many of us would agree, that we're currently living in an era of multiple simultaneous threats from a range of extremist actors across the ideological spectrum. But we're also seeing these extremists becoming increasingly adept at exploiting and adopting technology to recruit and radicalize a broader following, as well as we're tracking an uptick in extremist propaganda and events across the country. And for these many reasons, fighting extremism and hate has never been more important. And that's ultimately why the ADL and the Center on Extremism has dedicated itself to shining a bright light on the groups that are operating within the shadows of our society. So in our very brief time together, I'm going to highlight what the Center on Extremism does, as well as some of the most active groups operating here within the state of Washington. I'm trying to move this bar so I can operate my screen. Okay. So our team at the Center on Extremism is one of the foremost authorities on matters of not only extremism, but also terrorism and anti-Semitism. And we represent a combined knowledge of more than 100 years of experience with this arena. And this includes assisting law enforcement with investigations, providing tech companies with critical data and expertise, serving as congressional testimonies and witnesses, speaking at national and international conferences, as well as responding to a wide range of media requests. And just to get kind of a snapshot of the groups that the Center on Extremism tracks, we ultimately track extremists across the ideological spectrum. As mentioned, I believe I'm the subject matter expert on the alt-right, which is a subgroup within the white supremacist movement. And I also track border vigilantes and anti-immigration extremists. And our main focus at the Center on Extremism is particularly individuals that have ideological convictions outside the mainstream, but more importantly, individuals that are seeking to partake in criminal or violent action in order to achieve their goals and their beliefs. And so I apologize for the kind of triggering imagery, but this is just to give examples of what the Center on Extremism kind of deals with on a daily basis. And what's really remarkable about this, truly horrific and disgusting imagery is that it's not at all, unremarkable in our field. And what our job is at the Center on Extremism, and what my job is to comb through this mass, mound of extremist memes and imagery and look for that needle in the haystack, that one level of threat that rises to criminality or actionable violence, and alert law enforcement or our community partners so that we can better disrupt and monitor extremist threats in the country. The Center on Extremism produces major reports and timely blogs on extremist matters. Some of these includes background reports where we give the context and history of an extremist group. I encourage you, for example, if an extremist group is arrested within your community, to just Google the ADO website. We likely have a blog piece or at least a backgrounder on this group. We also have a variety of databases that are available to not only our community partners and community members, but also law enforcement and researchers. One of these is the Hate Symbols database. So this is a database of more than 200 symbols used by extremists. And ultimately the goal of this is to educate the public to better recognize symbols that serve as potential warning signs for presence of extremists in your community. So if you see a bumper sticker or a flag by your next door neighbor, you can look up on our website, find the symbol, if it is an extremist symbol, and read the context of that symbol, the history of it, as well as what groups are likely to be using it. Another database that we keep at the Center on Extremism is our heat map. And so this is the first of its kind interactive and customizable map that tracks extremist, anti-Semitic, and hate incidents across the nation. And what's really impactful about this heat map is not only can you see the hotspots across the United States, but you can scroll into your specific state, your specific city, and your specific community to see who's operating on the ground where you live and what is the most prominent threat where you are, whether that be anti-Semitic incidents or white supremacist propaganda. And unfortunately, it's not enough to just educate the public. Here's a snapshot of extremist plots and murders over the last 2 years. And in fact, this is already outdated. As you can see, Buffalo's not here, Uvalde's not here. And the numbers are going to be probably significantly higher as we look into 2022. And so this is where our role with law enforcement comes into play. And so the Center on Extremism provides a variety of briefings as well as event alerts and intelligence to help with extremist investigations and to help law enforcement. And so I just want to provide 2 case studies of Center on Extremism's work with law enforcement on extremist threats. The first of which is Corbin Kaufman. So Corbin Kaufman came to our radar because all of a sudden this virulent white supremacist and anti-Semite suddenly started posting 600 posts per day where he praised white supremacist killers and expressed his desire to kill Jews and other minorities. Because we saw this escalation and emboldenedness online, we began to launch an investigation where we started combing through these thousands upon thousands of online posts and putting together a kind of intelligence report. Through combing through these posts, we were able to pinpoint a location. Here on the very far, I always get confused when I'm doing PowerPoints, far right, is a wristband of an amusement park that we were able to track to Pennsylvania. In the middle, you'll see a barcode that's to a community pool that we tracked to Pennsylvania. And finally, on the far right, we see Corbin Kaufman putting up propaganda at a synagogue. And when you take a picture of glass, there's obviously a reflection. And ironically enough, the building that you see in the background is one that one of our Center on Extremism investigators happened to drive past every single summer in a small town in Pennsylvania. And so by pinpointing a location and putting together this intelligence and combing through his online footprint, we were able to pass this information on to law enforcement, and they were able to arrest 30-year-old Corbin Kaufman and charge him for posting online hate messages and threats. and he was sentenced to 18 months for his threats to the Jewish community. A little closer to home is the case of Dakota Reed, who is a white supremacist from Monroe, Washington. And so much like Corbin Kaufman, he came to our radar after we uncovered Reed's online history of not only violent threats, but fantasies to carry out a violent attack. He was saving up to buy guns and ammo to kill Jewish people. He said that he was going to make the news by shooting some Jews in 2025. He also urged his followers to take back their future one synagogue at a time. And because we were seeing this, not only terrible imagery, but also this actionable threat, we created a profile and collected evidence and warned law enforcement about this individual. And sorry, technical difficulties. And Reed was ultimately arrested and charged with malicious harassment, which is Washington's hate crime statute, and also charged for making bomb threats. And authorities, upon investigating, further found a cache of firearms, ammunition, as well as white supremacist propaganda in his residence. All right, and with the remaining few minutes I have left, I just want to quickly cover some of the most prominent groups operating within Washington. And so here is a snapshot of Washington that I took from the heat map. And I'm not going to be able to go into every single one of these incidents, but I encourage you to do so if you are interested. You can click on each of these kind of hotspots and it'll tell you what every incident is, as well as give a brief description. But overall, what's significant is that since 2019, there's been a more than 107% increase in extremist incidents within the state of Washington. Most of this is coming from white supremacist propaganda, and the majority of this propaganda is coming from one white supremacist group, which is called Patriot Front. So Patriot Front is the most active white supremacist group operating in the United States today. In fact, they're responsible for over 82% of all white supremacist propaganda nationwide since 2018. They average about 14 incidents of propaganda per day. And more importantly, there's a very active chapter within Washington. In fact, there's a chapter, it's called Network 8, that's how they label their chapters. And we, based on leaked attendance records, estimate that there's about 13 active members in the state. But more importantly, we're seeing these individuals within the state of Washington becoming more involved in criminal activity. So 2 Patriot Front members recently in July were charged with misdemeanor charges after vandalizing a pride memorial in Olympia last October. And the picture down here is of that mural. These same 2 men, one of these men being the network director or the chapter leader within Washington, were also arrested in June on conspiracy to commit riot charges at a pride event in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So we're seeing these individuals becoming increasingly active, traveling across state lines to target their perceived enemies, in this case, the LGBTQ community. Another group that's on our radar, I won't be able to go into super depth on this, is the Oath Keepers. So this is an anti-government militia group. And I want to highlight this because 2 weeks ago, we put out a report where Center on Extremism experts combed through 38,000 Oath Keepers that were in a membership database. And we cross-examined this to look at individuals that were particularly serving or previously held positions as an elected official, law enforcement, military, or first responder. And combing through that list, we then did this massive mapping project. So I highly encourage you to look at it. It's on our website. And this is just a snapshot from the state of Washington. So there were over 1,000 registered Oath Keepers, and a significant number of those held sensitive positions within our society. And the last group that I want to highlight is the Proud Boys. So the Proud Boys are a right-wing fight club that is especially active within the Pacific Northwest. And the Center on Extremism has been seeing a increased escalation of violence from this group, particularly with counter-protesters and their perceived enemy, which is Antifa. And a lot of this violence is happening within the Pacific Northwest. And I'm sure many of you are probably aware of this. And so we're seeing, Proud Boys shooting pepper spray at counter-protesters, breaking into counter-protesters' cars and beating them, shooting paintball bullets, and at least one incident of an individual pointing a gun at counter-protesters. And this general escalation between not only Proud Boys, but also the counter-protesters involved increases the likelihood of someone becoming seriously injured in the future. And already we saw one Proud Boy who accidentally shot himself in the foot during an exchange of bullets with counter-protesters. And this really doesn't bode well for the future within the Pacific Northwest region. And with that, I'm going to go to questions, and this will be Q&As for both Miri and my presentation. Let me just get my screen back.
All right, so I'm going to start with, I can't believe that you have to do this for a living. Good for you. because this is just one hell of a job. And I mean that in the worst way, obviously. I don't know how the heck you would even sleep at night. And I'm like terrorized just listening and watching all this. This is just shocking. I'm so glad that you two could be here today. I'm kind of feeling a bit, well, I don't even know how I'm feeling. I want to start with the first question. Has all this sort of been getting worse and worse and worse over, say, this is a loaded question, the last 6 years?
We've been seeing an uptick since about 2018. So that started with the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And ever since then, we've been seeing a rise of white supremacist propaganda, of extremist events across the ideological spectrum, extremist mass murders, as we've seen with recent mass shootings. And we have been tracking that for like the last 6 years. There was a decrease in 2020, but a lot of this was explained by COVID because there wasn't a lot of people in the workforce or at schools. So there wasn't a lot of targets, sadly enough. But now coming into 2021, 2022, coming out of COVID, we're seeing those numbers really take off, not only with propaganda and events, but also sadly with attacks. And we expect this to continue. Okay. I apologize for all the doom and gloom. I always feel so bad when I speak to a group because it really is just, it's real. It's real problems, but I mean, it is.
Yeah. No, I think we appreciate it. All right, so we've got a few minutes for a lot of questions. So let's see how we do this. What do you attribute to the reasons that Washington has such a high rate of hate crimes, especially when our population is not in the top 10 nationally and Seattle's perception as being very liberal? I kind of had the same question. How do you go? Where do you go with that? How do we get up there?
So I'm going to give a couple of thoughts. First of all, I think that Washington State and the greater Pacific Northwest do have a long history of domestic extremism and white supremacy here. And a lot of people moved out to the area specifically because they didn't see demographic diversity many decades ago and saw it as a place where they could establish themselves and create the kind of society that they wanted to create. But I think aside from the issue of white supremacy, which is not the driver of everyday hate crimes that I'm talking about in communities, although maybe you could talk about, hateful activity or propaganda. But when you really look at those FBI stats that I was talking about, I think that every community, no matter how large or small, is really facing a steep growth in hate that is coming up, and the dark underbelly of a lot of forces in society have been, totally brought out. But I actually think one of the reasons why Washington's data is so stark is because we actually do a much better job than a lot of other places in terms of data and reporting. The Seattle Police Department is the largest law enforcement agency in the state and the only law enforcement agency in the state that we know of at this moment that has a dedicated bias crimes coordinator within the agency. And that person does outreach to vulnerable populations and also ensures that everything that comes in related to criminal activity is properly tagged and noted, so that something that might appear like an act of vandalism to one person, when kind of parsed through and actually looked at the detail, can actually be classified properly as a hate incident, or when it rises to a crime. So that's really why Seattle and Washington State at large have such high numbers, is because even though it's reflective of something really horrible that's happening and manifesting on the ground, we actually are doing a pretty good job, at least within the Seattle Police Department, of tracking and exposing and reporting that information. So I could talk about this for a long time because we have so much growth to do in terms of how the system works better, but I will say that is one area that is working pretty well within that one agency.
So we'll have to have you back. All right, that leads me sort of to the next question, which was, how do you differentiate between hate crimes and other senseless acts of violence? Is there a difference? We have like 2 minutes.
The quick answer I'll give is that hate crimes occur when somebody is targeted for their immutable characteristics, and that is outlined in our law, whether it's gender, gender identity, religion, sexual orientation, race, etc. So there have been attempts at different times to add different groups to the hate crimes laws, but we have a very strong law right now in Washington State that's very representative, and it's really done when someone has, that is targeted, because of that specific identity group. And something that we say is unique about hate crimes is that even though an individual might be targeted, it's really a message towards an entire community that you're not safe. So it is something that's a little bit different than an act of violence, but unfortunately we are seeing way too many acts of census violence, census violence today.
So one last question. Can you talk about the intersection between mental health issues and extremism?
It's a great question.
It's a very good question.
There is a lot of crossover in some cases, and it does get hard. That is our job whenever there is a mass shooting incident, is to decide, is this an extremist incident? And ultimately that comes down to, was there political or ideological motive? Either they wanted to carry out this attack for political, social, or ideological change. And that's where the gray area comes in, because not always is it clear. For example, the mass shooting in Vegas, which was, I think, 2017, we don't list that as an extremist incident because we have not found evidence to link him to political or ideological goals. Rather, it might have been an individual with, troubling disposition. And so that's really where our job comes in, is trying to find those ideological motives. But yes, there is some overlap in some cases, particularly with mass shooting incidents, like school shootings. A lot of these individuals do have pre-existing mental health issues. Okay.
Well, I don't know how to thank you two. I'm just glad it's Wednesday and you two do this for a living. So on behalf of all of us, thank you for taking this on, because I'm really I would be more, yeah, good for you. Thank you, Miri. Thank you, Morgan, so much. Hope maybe if you've got a few seconds, there's so many questions. I don't know if you've got maybe a moment to just sort of fill in some of the blanks and answer these. If you can't, no worries. If you can, fantastic. We really appreciate it. President Beth, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Ken. And I just wanted to echo what Ken said to you both, Miri and Morgan. Really appreciate your presentation today. Of course, it is sobering to learn these details, but we also know that knowledge and awareness are a key step in addressing the issues. And it's important to also note that Seattle Rotary does not shy away from hard conversations. So we appreciate all you have shared with us today. And in recognition of your generosity of time, Seattle 4 has contributed to Harvest Against Hunger, which provides healthy meal components to food banks. So 600 servings of healthy produce have been given in your name for your time today. So thank you. Would like to also thank our gold sponsors. We have Liz Powell of Remax on Market and Bob Alexander, and we are appreciative of both of them for their support of Rotary. So one of the great aspects of Seattle Rotary is the numerous ways that members can connect with one another, engage in the community, and provide service to those in need, whether here locally or internationally. Now, our fellow club member, Larry Granite, is going to share an opportunity where you can combine travel and service. So Larry, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, I am turned over to. Thank you, President Beth. Thank you, fellow Rotarians. I have 3 minutes to report on this new opportunity. Seattle 4 has agreed to sponsor tours to Africa, mostly to malaria projects, but with opportunities to enjoy one of the great wonders of the world. February 2023 will be when we go. First tour. There will be 3 different tours. First tour, 7 or 8 days to Zambia. Cost under $2,000 per person, double occupancy. Includes hotels, all meals, including beer and wine, and in-country transportation, tips, and a few other miscellaneous things. Then the second tour, a couple of days later, 7 or 8 days in Uganda, including 2 of these nights at a 5-star resort on an island in the middle of the Victoria Nile River. Dynamite, dynamite. This tour would probably be around $2,500 and also will include a visit to another resort, not quite a 5-star, where we're going to be able to see animals, go on some game drives. The third tour is a 4-day tour to see the Wildebeest migration in Tanzania. I learned during the month of February, approximately 500,000 wildebeest calves are born. That's a lot of predators coming around. I don't know who's counting all this and how they got to that number. This tour will be under $2,500. It includes airfare from Uganda to Tanzania, in-country airfare out to the middle of the Serengeti plain. Still includes the hotels, the food, safari guides, which are obviously more important, tips to them and tips in the hotel and the bars. We should have a flyer with more specific information ready for the totem in a couple of weeks. But I think you can take 1, 2, or all 3 tours, whatever works for you in terms of your time availability and resources. We do want to max out the tours at about 20 people apiece. Airfare from the States to Africa is not included. As to what we've seen in the past is at least half the Rotarians will travel on airline miles. So why would we want to put in a tour which avoids that? So at this point, I thank you. I put my contact in the chat box. If any of you have questions you want to talk to me before the more precise data is available. But I pretty much know the hotels, the routings, and we've done 2 of these tours before and they work. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Larry. Appreciate you sharing that opportunity with us. And also thank you for all the work that you put in to really plan through all those details and make it easy for Rotarians to participate. So the good news is there's even more opportunities for members to engage. And we'd like to bring back up to the online podium here is Membership Manager Miri Goldie to share some upcoming events with you.
All right, thank you, Beth. Next up, we have the Museum of Glass tour, Saturday, October 1st at 11 a.m. at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma. For more information about that, please email fedvadickman at hotmail.com. Oh, and we also have the whale watching boat tour coming up on Saturday, October 8th at 10:30 a.m. I think the RSVP date has been pushed up to 9:30, but I think your deposit is due on 9/23. So for more details, please email Stephen Morse or Linda Lowry. And then we have our International District Tour with the SUTA, also in October, Thursday, October 13th, I believe, at 4:45 p.m. I think this is going to be a really exciting event, kind of a part 2 of one that she has done previously for the club. So please RSVP with the SUTA for that event. And I think I'm turning it over to Ken next.
Yes.
Lordy B. Lordy B. All right. So if that's not enough, got to stand by for the next couple of weeks presentations because these things are crazy cool. Just in case today wasn't crazy cool. Next week at the Westin, does it say the Westin? It's at the Westin. Don't look at the bottom. Club. It is?
Well, it says Rainier Club. We'll have to verify that. Karma, do you know?
I'm going to get back to you, but at least we know that the president of Seattle U is coming, so that's very cool. Along with the president, Penyaba, is also a conversation about the Smith Tower. I had done one before about the lodge at St. Edward Park in Kirkland. Now we're bringing on the Smith Tower. Can't wait. The gentleman that runs Space Flight, how different are these conversations? He'll be here in 2 weeks. I went to their open house last night. I'm still like freaking out what these people do. I can't wait to hear his conversation. And then the city attorney, Ann Davidson, will be here in 3 weeks, along with Anita Delmar. And this will be a very cool conversation. Can't wait for that one. And then also, if there are any Washington Husky dog fans, Mike the Gastineau will be here also on the 19th to talk about the very best year the dogs ever had. And speaking of sports, Oh no, before that, Miri and Morgan, thank you so much again for being here today. And thank you for going the extra mile. I see that you're answering the questions. I think that's extraordinary. Thank you for looking after all of our members. President Beth, back to you. Everybody else, have a great week.
All right. So Karma, thank you. It sounds like we have confirmed that it is at the Westin next week. So for those of you joining us in person, lunch will be at the Westin. And I do want to just highlight that I have a conflict next week, and so past President Sue Nixon will be standing in for me. So thank you, Sue, for stepping up and helping out that way. I appreciate it. And just on that note, speaking of having that information about where our meetings are in the future, if you haven't done so in a while, I really do encourage you to visit the Seattle Rotary website, which is seattlerotary.org. It's not only a great place to find information on upcoming speakers, meetings, and events, but it's also a great place to connect with your fellow members. So if you have any difficulty in navigating the site, you can contact Miri and she'll be happy to help sort that out. We're actually going to be planning a tutorial after a future meeting in October, so that those of you that are more hands-on and would like that tutorial, then you can get that directly. So, okay. As many of you know, my work at the Seattle Sports Commission continues to be busy with plans gaining momentum around the NCAA Women's Basketball Regionals in March. And that'll be at Climate Pledge Arena, as well as the MLB All-Star Week in early July next summer. Now, it's especially exciting to me to have the opportunity to host the Collegiate Women's Basketball right here in Seattle. 2 years ago, when the stark inequities between the NCAA men's and women's basketball was put on full display through social media, there was a true reckoning at the leadership level. And last year's Women's Final Four, which I was able to attend, was an equally stark improvement in equipment, services, media recognition, attendance, the whole spectrum. So bringing the regionals to Seattle is an opportunity for us to not only continue to raise that bar, but to blow it out of the park by selling out all 8 games at Climate Pledge Arena next March. It's a chance for people to see truly exciting basketball and to showcase our region's commitment to equality. It's one of the things that Seattle is known for, and it's one of the things that FIFA, in advance of the World Cup, has asked Seattle to be a model to other host cities about. So stay tuned for more information on that, but I hope that you will make plans to attend one or more of the games next March. Now, speaking of basketball and Climate Pledge Arena, we will finally be seeing the NBA on the court right here in Seattle when the LA Clippers come here to play 2 exhibition games. The first is Friday night against Israel's professional team, the Maccabi, and then again on Monday, October 3rd, against the Portland Trailblazers. So having the LA Clippers here for exhibition games is an exciting step in the right direction to our end goal, of course, of having the Sonics return to their rightful place here in our city. Now, I'll leave you with this final quote from NBA legend Larry Bird. "Leadership is diving for a loose ball, getting the crowd involved, getting other players involved. It's about being able to take it as well as dish it out. That's the only way you're going to get respect from other players." Now, I would say that's also a definition of what it means to step up. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.